I know you guys love to hear about regression results. By the way, how many of you guys have taken an econometrics class? One. Okay. Good. Yeah. That's what before we got into the next section, I thought I better check on this so I don't really bore you to tears. Okay. So here are the implications so far of the evidence we have from the Middle East and from this country case studies. There's no evidence that supports the view that natural resources undermines democracies. There's no evidence that natural resources impede democratization, and there's no evidence that natural resources delay or slow democratization. These things appear to occur independent of natural resources. Now let me be very, very clear here. This is not to say that you can't find a country on the planet today, or at some time in the past, in which an autocrat like Hugo Chavez in Venezuela hasn't used oil revenues to maintain his dictatorship. It is to say, however, that you can't find evidence in support of some generalizable law-like statement. Because for every Hugo Chavez you can point to and say, look, Hugo Chavez keeps himself in power with oil revenues, so oil must be causing autocracy in Venezuela, you say, well, the United States in the 19th century was highly dependent on oil and minerals. But that didn't undermine democracy in the United States. Mexico, at the same time, has had this tremendous oil boom, democratized. And so, just as it would be, you wouldn't want to deduce a law-like statement using Mexico, and if we said, oh, let's look at Mexico's experience. Mexico had an oil boom, Mexico democratized. These two things must go together. Oil causes democracy. We wouldn't generate a law-like statement from that. If I did that, you guys would laugh. Right? Similarly, you wouldn't want to look at the regime of Hugo Chavez and say, Hugo Chavez is using oil revenues to maintain himself in power. True. But you wouldn't, on the basis of that one case, be scientifically responsible to deduce a law-like statement that oil has this effect everywhere at all times. In fact, if you were to observe Venezuela before Hugo Chavez, when it was democratic, you would observe it had a lot of oil then too. So you wouldn't want to say that, well, so Venezuela had a lot of oil when it was democratic, and if Venezuela had a lot of oil when it was autocratic, maybe democracy and autocracy are operating independently of each other here, or operating independently of oil. Right? So we're not arguing that you can't point to a case in the world today. Say, look, in Iran, you've got an autocratic regime. You've got lots of oil. Oil's causing it. Right? Well, maybe it's true in Iran. We'd be surprised if we couldn't find cases like that. The point we're making is you can't deduce generalizable law-like statements, which lots of political scientists, as well as lots of sort of policy people, as well as guys like Thomas Friedman, purport as laws of petropolitics. Right? So we're saying is be very careful about these law-like statements. Now, there is a big literature, and I'm not going to spend much time with this because there's one of you guys who's had econometrics, and the other, I've been reading faces as you've gone through the presentation. You guys like the graphs, and the econometrics are like driving nails into the floor with your forehead. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time with this. However, there is a literature out there which uses cross-sectional regressions. They're comparing every country in the world against every other country from 1972 to 2000, and they find in these comparisons across countries, not comparisons within countries like we've done over time, but comparisons across countries, they find a pattern. And so what this literature finds is that countries that have they're resource dependent, are more likely to be autocratic, and countries that are less resource dependent are more likely to be democratic. And they say, aha, a law. We found a law. And so we looked at this literature and we said, well, we got different results than they did. So what's going on here? How come in cross-section you get one result, and in a time series you get another? All right. So there's basic things you do when you look at data, and one of them is if you've got a data series in which you get a result based on one kind of measure of natural resources. You want to see, do you always get that measure no matter how you measure natural resources? If you get different results depending on how you measure it, well, maybe the result's just driven by one particular measure. The other thing you want to do is you want to make sure in any regression that you don't have a couple of weird outlying numbers that are driving all the results. Right? So, for example, let's imagine this room. I bet the average height in this room is about 5'9". What if we had 3 basketball players sitting in the back from the Stanford basketball team? These guys are 7 feet tall. Okay? Our average height would go way up, wouldn't it? Right? Our average height would be, I don't know, 6'2". Unless we have some guy who's 7'6". I mean, we must have some monsters on this team. Right? We got some 7'6" center, and we got a bunch of forwards. They're 7'1", right? Our average height would go up. Well, that doesn't imply there's actually anybody in this room who is 6'2", right? 3 outliers drive the results, right? And so you want to make sure outlying cases don't drive your results in anything you're doing, right? We want to know whether outliers could be driving the standard results people get when they compare countries against each other. Are some extreme cases actually doing all the work? Are there basketball players in these samples? Finally, one of the things these countries do, these regressions, standard regressions do, is they treat all countries alike. This is something you guys should be very suspicious of as policymakers. Whenever some social scientist gets up in front of you and starts blathering on about his regression results, you want to ask, are these regressions that this guy's presenting to me, is this a cross-section? Are we comparing countries across each other and deducing that something must have happened in time within a country? This is like one of the big no-nos of statistics. Okay. You learn not to do this the first year of statistics. Why people do it, I don't know. Maybe there's money in it. Okay, you guys don't find it as funny as I do. But I've been here for 22 years, so I'm really cynical. Okay, so don't get me started about my cynicism. So that's a long story. You guys don't find this funny, but I do. Okay, so you want to know, right, whether or not. So essentially what they're doing in these regressions is they're saying, all right, let's throw all the world into a blender, and let's compare Venezuela and Denmark. That's essentially what they're doing. Every country's in there, right? Now, and they'll start throwing some variables to control for the fact that Venezuela is near the equator and Denmark isn't. And in Venezuela they speak Spanish, and in Denmark they speak Danish. And in Denmark they eat more cheese than they do in Venezuela, and they read Arabis. And you can throw a bunch of variables in. But I don't care how many variables you throw in, you can never control for all the differences between Venezuela and Denmark. These are really, really different places. And so the right way to control, to do this, is to just compare countries against themselves in time. So we're going to do that. All right, very quickly. I realize this is, so you want to look for, you see those little stars, like in the second column, or the first column? 3 stars means statistically significant at 1%, 1 star means at 10%, and 2 stars means at 5%. The first thing we want to do is see, does it matter how you measure it? How you measure natural resource dependence in these standard regressions, these cross-sectional regressions. And you'll see first we look at fuel and mineral exports over GDP, and you get sign and the statistical significance that's out there in the literature. More fuel exports, more mineral exports, lower democracy.
Steve, if they read Ross, that's a table that almost replicates Ross's table 2001. You'll see a similar table, at least the first column.
Can you maybe point with the cursor?
I don't know if I can do that. Here we go. Here it is. Here we are. Is that showing up? Yeah, there we are. Right?
Coefficients are almost like that.
Right? So you see negative coefficients and highly significant. Okay, let's look at this. Let's measure it as percent of government revenue from oil and minerals. This was the measure we used for her historical series. And again, you get a negative. I'm too old to be driving a computer. It's gone. What happened to this? Let me go back.
I could stand up there like
So you see that it's negative 0.0.